Welcome, everyone. I'm excited to have you here. And I'm going to dive right in, but before I do want to tell you, please, as you get questions, drop them into the Q&A box or into the chat box. I'm happy to try and I'll kind of glance at it as I'm going, but we'll certainly try and leave plenty of time at the end to cover some questions. All right, so with that, Jessica already went through my bio. I don't intend to go through that again. I just like this page because I think it's nice to see a picture of who's talking when I do webinars, so that's me. You can imagine I'm waving at y'all. But let's dive into what we're going to talk about here today. So this is just a quick glance at the agenda. I'm going to start out talking about what does it even mean to measure business analysis success or requirement success, okay? Then we're going to talk about how do we quantify that business value on our projects. Go through some metrics that matter to executives and how those relate to what we do in the business analysis or the product management or the product owner roles. We'll also talk about some of the results that I've gotten from surveying our own customer projects. And then at the end, I'm going to leave you with a few things that you can do right away on your project, like starting tomorrow. And then longer term, what are some of the things that you can do? Right off the bat, let me start with, why are we even talking about this topic today? Well, PMI has done some interesting research that showed that of all the projects that fail, there's anywhere from 30 to 50% at least of those projects that are failing, and of those, 47% are failing due to poor requirements management, okay? So again, many of our projects, even up to half of our projects are failing. 47% are failing because of poor requirements management. That's a big deal, guys. And that leads me to wonder, how can we turn that metric around? How do we know if we're even doing a good job at requirements so we can start to see, first of all, less projects fail, but then secondarily, that the reason isn't behind, requirements behind it. So that makes me ask, how do I know if I'm doing a good job at requirements? Well, inevitably, when I work with customers, I have a lot of them who are trying to improve their own requirements processes. And they ask questions like, how do I know if my requirements are good? How do I know if my requirements team is doing a good job? How do we show we're adding value? We're undervalued in the organization, okay? And people are always asking me what kind of metrics they can use to measure the quality of those requirements. In fact, in our own organization at Seilevel, I'm constantly thinking about how do we measure the quality of what we're doing, right? Everybody wants to know if they're doing well and then use that to get better. So I think these questions are important. I often think that as requirements practitioners, I think we're often undervalued. And in many organizations, I see this role as business analyst is treated as a subordinate to other roles. I think some organizations treat this role as a note taker. And I got to be honest, sometimes the work isn't glamorous. So I think that understanding the impact of what we're doing is so important because it can help us feel good about what we're doing every day, and it can also help demonstrate to our peers in the organization that we are actually adding value. The other thing is that there's studies out there that are showing that the business analysis or the enterprise analysis skill sets, that demand is dropping. That worries me because I feel like the demand is actually there. It's that the organizations aren't recognizing the value of that particular role. And I would ask you, if anybody wants to offer up in the chat box right now, how do you measure the quality of what you're doing in your organization, right? And so if you're with some coworkers, you can talk about this later. Or again, if you want to drop something into the Q&A or into the chat box right now, I would love to hear some of the audience's opinions on how you measure that quality of the BA work. A moment to think about that. Okay, great. Thank you, Christy, for jumping in right there. Document reviews. Here's one where we have no defects, no rework, right? So we're looking to see the stuff that we produce. At the end of the day, does the software have defects? If not, we probably did a good job. We're not having to do rework. Peer feedback, brilliant, right? Our peers sometimes are our best critics, particularly if they understand the role. Here's one, which is number of program change requests, right? How project objectives are met on schedule. Thank you, Stephen, for being honest, that unfortunately sometimes we don't measure the quality of our work. Number of defects on requirements, number of defects on design. Business analysts are reviewed by the business unit they support about once a month. That's great. Thank you, Bob. Tracy's saying if the programmer can code from the requirements, that's a good sign. So these are really, I think, great answers. I mean, there's nothing wrong with what you're doing, and I'm going to look at whether we can supplement that with anything else here today. So ask that question to a general audience. Many of the answers I get back are these types of things. These are things that we can look at to measure the requirements quality, right? And there's things, and I'm sure you could add to this list, right, of things to look great. Are our requirements well written? Are they complete? And then there's things like, are they atomic? Are they testable? Do they have any vague words in them? Okay. So there's nothing wrong with this list, but here's the bad news. I think this stuff is the really uninteresting problem to solve. Okay. I'm not saying it's wrong. I just don't get excited about checking, does my peer have unique IDs on all their requirements? Okay, that's where I'm talking about not all that interesting of a problem to solve, so it's hard to get BAs and teams rallied around measuring these kinds of things. Okay, and I will tell you, before we move on, I will tell you we used to, at Seilevel, do really in-depth project requirements assessments on our team, and it was complicated. We had 3 peer reviews who weren't on the project that would review each project's documentation. We had about 100 criteria to evaluate, some of these included. And we had all these fancy scores that when I would look at them would tell me the relative performance from team to team on the requirements. And I'm not going to say I didn't get anything useful out of it, because I did. It told me what some of our biggest problem areas were as an organization. But I am going to tell you that the team hated doing it. They hated filling these things out. They hated evaluating their peers on these checklists. They wanted to go out and do the analytical thinking. They wanted to have fun on their projects and really solve the challenging problems with the projects. Again, not checking whether their peers had unique IDs on their requirements. Okay, by this is kind of the uninteresting stuff. Now, slides ago, I said to you that 47% of unsuccessful projects are failing due to poor requirements management, and the poor requirements management part of that phrase. But I would contend that I've actually emphasized the wrong part of that. Okay, and instead, I think we need to look at that phrase and say, the important part of that phrase is that 47% of unsuccessful projects fail to meet their goals. It is because of poor requirements management. We need to back up a stage. All right? Again, remember, studies are showing that at least 30%, maybe more like 50% of projects are failing. They're failing to meet their goals, and that is where we need to put our emphasis around how do we change that metric. All right? Because if we do that, the rest of this will kind of fall out from under it. So when I ask the question about how do we measure the quality of requirements, I think I'm asking the wrong question. I think instead we should be asking, are we delivering business value? Do we have the right requirements so that we can meet the business objectives? That's the real measurement that tells us if our requirements are any good. And I'm excited to tell you that as I scroll through your chats and your Q&A comments, some of you are spot on with that. You're looking at, did we deliver the business value? Did we deliver on budget? Those kinds of things. Those get closer to, are we being successful in the work we do with our requirements? And for all of this is because at the end of the day, requirements are only a means to an end. Okay? So even if our requirements appear to be of high quality, that isn't going to do you any good if they aren't aligned with achieving the right business objectives. Okay? So I could have perfect and still completely fail to deliver what the business really needs. And interestingly, if I deliver a successful project every time without any requirements, like I would, right? As much as I am passionate about requirements, and we don't spend money on the requirements for fun, we do it because they help us deliver successful projects. So as the people who are responsible for that requirements work, we have got to do a great job on the requirements so that we can deliver that desired end business objective or that desired end business value. Okay, so again, requirements are only but a means to an end. Right? I was reminded of a really cool story that I heard from a colleague in the industry about a project he worked on. So this isn't my own project, but